Chapter 137 of Shrimadbhagavatam, Her Confession. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Kanva returned to the ashrama after the king had gone away. Contrary to her usual custom, Shakuntala did not rush to welcome him. She was overcome with shame, and again she was afraid of his disapproval. Slowly and haltingly, she came to his presence. She took the basket of fruits from his hands and placed a seat for him. She brought water for washing his feet. As she was washing them, she spoke not a word, nor did she raise her eyes from the ground. Silently, she sat there without speaking a word, and it was out of fear and shame. She felt that she had done something very wrong, and she was afraid of his censure. She felt helplessly caught up in a web of intrigue, and her guilt made her dumb. Kanva looked at her in surprise and said, "Child, this is the first time I have seen you shy. Today you have been so different from your usual self. I am not able to recognize my child at all in this new Shakuntala. Tell me what has caused this change in you." Still, she spoke not a word. She was busy peeling fruit. After he had partaken of them, and after he had rested his limbs on the seat she had placed for him, Shakuntala began to talk softly and haltingly. She thought of Dushyanta, her husband, and knew that she had to talk to her father of him. Her face was red with shame, and her voice was choked, since tears were threatening to fill her eyes. She braced herself, massaging her father's feet all the while. She said, "Father, when you had gone away, Dushyanta, the son of Ilila, had come to the ashrama. I think it was fate which brought him, since I chose him to be my lord from the moment I saw him. He took me, Father. I fall at your feet. Please do not be angry with him. With the power of your tapas, you are able to see everything with your inner eye. I do not have to tell you in detail what happened. I ask you to be kind and tolerant with our impulsive marriage. He was insistent, and I succumbed." The rishi sat silent for a while with his eyes closed. With his inner eye, he saw everything which had taken place. He did not find anything wrong with the hurried marriage. He smiled on his daughter and said, "No, my child, I am not angry. I know what took place here when I was absent. Without taking me into consideration, Dushyanta, a king of the Paurava house, and you, my daughter, have entered into this holy state of marriage. You naturally think that I will be offended, but I am not. Do not be afraid either for yourself or for your husband. You have done well by choosing a good man for yourself. As for the Gandharva marriage, the king was right. It is very common among Kshatriyas, and you have also insisted on the correct rituals to make sure of the future of the child. You will be the mother of a noble son. Dushyanta is a righteous king and is famed the world over for his upright character. He is the best among men, and he has chosen you as his wife. You will be the mother of a son who will rule the entire earth, bound by the seas on all sides. He will be a monarch. I am really very happy about your choice of Dushyanta. Several years have passed since you came to me, and the thoughts of finding a worthy husband for you have been in my mind constantly. You have solved the problem for me. I am pleased with you, and to show my pleasure, I am ready to grant you any boon you ask of me." Shakuntala cried openly now and said, "My father, do I have to ask a boon of you? You have ever given me everything I wanted. Yet, since you have commanded me, I will ask you. I want you to be kindly disposed towards Dushyanta, who is my husband. I want nothing more of you." Kanva willingly granted her wish and stroked her head with affection. He said, "From today you should learn the ways of the city and learn how to deport yourself as the queen of the Paurava monarch." He then thought of the purifying her, and with this thought in mind, he stroked her gently. With his touch, all her feelings of guilt vanished, and Shakuntala was happy. She knew that her father had condoned her act, and that was enough for her. Krishnarpanamastu. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishnarpanamastu. Chapter 138 of Shrimad Bhagavatam. Shakuntala waits in vain. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shakuntala realized after some days that she was bearing the son of Dushyanta in her womb. She was very happy. The child was growing inside her. But along with that, a new worry was growing too. The king had told her that he would come again and take her back with him to the city. For the first few days, she did not think much of the delay in his coming. But the days became weeks and still he did not come. Nor did she receive any news of him or from him. She said, he must be busy with the problems of a ruler, and so he could not find time to devote to me and the thoughts of my going to him. I will wait patiently. She waited, and still he did not come. She was now very unhappy. She lost interest in everything. She would not eat. Day and night she spent without sleep and food, thinking of the king and her position. Still, a little pulse of hope would beat within her, and she would say, today or tomorrow or the day after, he is sure to come with his army as he promised. He is a very righteous king. He is a Paurava and he cannot abandon me like this. She would count the days, and the days became weeks, and now months passed by. 3 years thus passed her by, and Shakuntala had become the mother of a son. The child was in her womb for 3 years before he was born. He was a very beautiful child, and when he was born, flowers rained on him from the skies. Divine music could be heard to celebrate the birth of a child who would later be the greatest of the monarchs of the line of the moon. Indra came to Shakuntala and said, Shakuntala, your son will become the emperor of this entire world. No one will equal him in strength, beauty, glory, prowess. He will perform the Ashwamedha and Rajasuya several times. This son of yours will be the greatest of the Paurava kings. The inmates of Kanva's ashrama were greatly excited by the prophecy about the newborn child. To think that their Shakuntala would be the mother of the emperor of the world was thrilling to the inhabitants of the ashrama. They were simply folk whose needs were so few and their desires were much less. They were happy for their daughter whom they had cherished as their own. Kanva performed all the rites necessary for a newborn. The child was growing fast. Tiny white teeth soon appeared, like jasmine buds. Lisping words from his lips were the delight of the listeners. A strange habit this child had. Even when he was hardly able to walk, the little boy enjoyed rushing into the den of a lion, and from the side of the lioness, he would snatch the cubs in his tiny arms and walk away. He knew no fear when his mother frightened him about the anger of the lioness. He would fight with the lions with his little arms and frighten them away, and this was a wonder which was always the talk of the people in the ashrama. As he was growing up, his fearlessness became proverbial. And so he grew, the son of Shakuntala. When he was 6 years old, the child became an extremely capable hunter. He took great delight in fighting lions, tigers, wild boars, wolves, wild bulls and bears, which were in the forest adjoining the ashram. Seeing his prowess, the Rishi Kanva, his grandfather, called him Sarvadhamana. Sarvadhamana. As for Dushyanta, when he returned to the city, his thoughts were with Shakuntala. But he was terribly afraid of Kanva. He was afraid to face the Rishi and his anger, and so he kept silent about going to the forest and bringing his newly wedded wife with him back to the city. And as time passed, the memory of that mad moment with Shakuntala began to wane away, and in a short time it was lost in the clouds of oblivion. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishnarpanamastu. Chapter 139 of Shrimadbhagavatam, The Leave Taking. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. As time passed, Kanva found that his daughter was wasting away. She would always be immersed in thought. She was not the playful, happy girl who was wont to delight the old man's heart in the days of old. Her eyes were sunken and her words were few. She had become pale, and Kanva knew that she was not happy at all. The boy had reached the age of 12, and he had been taught the Vedas and the Shastras like all the children of the rishis in the ashrama. Kanva decided that it was time for them to go to the city, to the presence of the king. He knew that the time had come when the youngster should be crowned as the Yuvaraja. Kanva called Shakuntala to his side and made her sit near him. He stroked her head gently, and the very touch was enough to make her weep without restraint. He comforted her for a while and then said, I know the grief which is gnawing at your heart strings. Listen to me, my child. To a woman, the only place is by the side of her husband. It has been said that for a woman, the path to heaven is through serving her husband and pleasing him in every way. You have waited all this while for the king to send for you. Since he has not done so, it is essential that you should go to him. You have waited long enough for him to come. Since this Paurava king does not seem to have any intention of coming for you, I have decided to send you to him. Do not bear him any ill will because of his seeming indifference. Seeing his son, the king is sure to be happy. Your son will be crowned the Yuvaraja, and that will make you happy. Kanva paused and looked at Shakuntala. He could see that she was not at all happy at the thought of going to the king who had hurt her so deeply. She was about to say something when Kanva held up his hand and said, No, my child, I do not want you to contradict me. I wish that you should go to your husband. It is not right for a woman to stay at her father's house for a long time once she is married. I am only doing what is expected of a father who wishes his daughter to be happy. She was silent. Kanva made all the preparations for the mother and son to make the journey. Very soon, the day came when Shakuntala had to leave for the city. Kanva embraced his daughter with affection and took his dear grandson on his lap. He smelled the top of his head and said, Child, Sarvadhamana, there is a great line of rulers by the name Paurava, and the king who rules us now comes of that noble line, and his name is Dushyanta. Your mother is the queen of that king. She will be going to her husband's house accompanied by you, the king's heir. Go and salute your father. You are to be crowned as the Yuvaraja. Treat the king with respect, and in course of time rule the land which has come to you from a long line of great and illustrious kings. And when you are king and when you are seated on the throne, think of me some time. The old man's eyes were filled with tears. The child fell at his feet and said, You are a father to me and you are my mother. I do not want any other father. I want only you. In this world and in the world to come, it is serving you which will grant me punya and nothing else. As for my mother, Shakuntala, she can go to her husband on her own. I will sit at your feet and spend all my life with you. I think you are angry with me for my wild pranks with the animals of the forest, and you want to punish me by sending me away from you. I assure you, father, I will not molest the animals anymore, and I will sit at your feet and learn my lessons well and with great attention. Please do not banish me. The little boy clung to the feet of the old man and wept as though his heart would break. Shakuntala sobbed her heart out. Her love for her father was so great, and the words of her son made her more unhappy. The son, hearing his mother sob, said, Listening to the words of our father, why do you weep? If you are in love with your husband and want to join him, you can go at once. I will stay with father. His words hurt her, and she said, One man commits sin and many people suffer for it. The one who commits the crime manages to escape the results of it, but others suffer for it. Even so, it has been with me. I am the one to suffer. My son, do not think I want to go. I want only one thing, and that is a place at the feet of my father, nothing else. Like a fallen creeper, she fell at the feet of Rishi Kanva, and he lifted her up and pacified her. He wiped her tears and made her sit down. He then spoke softly and gently, persuading her to abandon her obstinate refusal. The young boy was also listening to his words. Kanva said, Listen to me, Shakuntala. I am saying only what is good for you. You have lived like a flower in this ashrama, which is far removed from civilization, and I think I have not taught you the rules which are usually taught to young maids. Your motherless state and my bachelorhood are together to be blamed for this innocence in you. A pativrata has no place except by the side of her husband. Pativrata means a woman who has no religion except her husband. For a Pativrata, the heavens always keep their gates open. The gods are pleased with her. This is the reward which she gets from her devotion to her husband. You have a great future ahead of you, and also your son's future is at stake. For his future happiness, if not for yours, you should go to Dushyanta. Kanva then stroked his grandson's head with his old and gnarled hands and said, "Child, you are my grandson, and you are also the grandson of Ilila, the king of the lunar race. You must do your duty so that your mother does not fail in hers. She loves her husband. No woman can forget a man once she has loved him, but she does not want to go to him. You are a Paurava and you are the future king of the world. Now be a man and take your mother to your father. If you do not like it there, then come back to me. You are always welcome." Neither of them spoke a word. Kanva summoned his disciples and said, "Take Shakuntala and leave her with her husband. I am sending her, not because I want to, but because a woman's place is by the side of her husband, and staying with a father for a long time is not good for her. People will not think highly of her." Sarvadamana, with the hope of coming back to the ashrama, did not object so much to the journey now. He said, "Mother, do not delay. Let us go to the king's presence." He then fell at the feet of his grandfather and received his blessings. Shakuntala went round her father and then prostrated before him. Her eyes were raining tears while she stood with folded palms and said, "During all these years when you brought me up, I have often, out of ignorance or out of carelessness, spoken harshly to you perhaps, been disrespectful or at times even indifferent. I must have done so many wrong things, but you must be tolerant and forgive me for all these happenings." Kanva's tears were falling fast now. He could not speak and his heart was heavy with grief, the grief of parting from his beloved daughter. He composed himself and addressing his disciples who were to accompany her, he said, "This child of mine has been brought up with tender care by me, as you all know. She was born in the forest and she has all her life lived only in the forest and she knows nothing of the world. Take great care of this Shakuntala, who is already very unhappy. Give her to the king and come back." He then said, "This is my message to the king. This woman, Shakuntala, whom you married years ago, when you had come to my ashrama, has become the mother of your son. They are sent to you with my blessings. Take them and be happy." Shakuntala and her son finally took leave of Kanva and walked slowly and unwillingly towards the road which was to take them to a new life. Shakuntala's mind was full of sadness at the thought of leaving all that had meant so much to her for so many years. Her father's tears were still wet on her head when she finally took leave of him. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishna Arpanamast. Chapter 140 of Shrimadbhagavatam, Mother and Son. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. After travelling by stages, they finally arrived at the gates of the city Pratishtana. This was the city where Pururavas lived with Urvashi in the days of old. Pururavas, the ancestor of Dushyanta. When they reached the gates of the city, they found out that the palace of the king was in the center of the city and that it was like the mansion of Indra himself. In the palace, they were told, was the courtyard where the king granted audience to anyone who wished to see him. Near the gates of the city, people began to stare curiously at the new arrivals. They were particularly interested in the companions of Shakuntala. Their ascetic garbs and their matted hair drew the attention of everyone, and some people commented on it. The disciples of Kanva did not relish this. They stopped abruptly and said, "Shakuntala, as per the desire of our Guru, we have brought you to the city where your husband rules. We will now leave you and return to the ashrama." Shakuntala was afraid of the new place, the new surroundings. She was feeling lost, and again, it was so long since she had seen the king and she did not know how he would receive her. She said, "Please come with me to the palace, and after the king has seen us, you can go back." They shook their heads and said, "It cannot be done. In our way of life, the rules forbid a hermit from entering a city. We have brought you safely to the gates of the city. You can easily find your way to the palace. As for us, We have nothing to do with cities nor with the people who live here. This place and its urbanity are of no use to the likes of us who have renounced all forms of bondage. We wish to go back. Shakuntala's eyes were full of tears. They comforted her, saying, "Do not be afraid, you will be all right. We have been observing the omens all the way and they have been good throughout. Your son will certainly be crowned. You have been blessed by our Guru and his words have never been known to be wasted." They turned away from the city and began walking fast. She stood there holding her son's hand in hers, and so she stood until they were out of sight. They took away with them her last link with the ashrama. Shakuntala stood like a statue. Shakuntala stood like a statue, lost in a reverie, and her son brought her back to reality. He tugged at her hand and she walked slowly into the city with her mind still pinning for her father and her life in the ashrama. Her steps were slow and hesitant, and her eyes had a sick, scared look like that of a stricken deer. Her son held her hand firmly in his, and it was he who supported her while they walked through the king's way. The child was highly impressed by the lofty buildings which seemed to vie with each other in an attempt to touch the clouds. The youngster's eyes were bright with excitement. She was listless, and so they walked towards the palace. The people on the road were struck by the sight of this very beautiful woman with such sad eyes and the youngster who walked like a lion. They seemed to be mother and son. Some said, "She looks like the queen of the heavens, Sachi Devi, walking with her son Jayanta." Others said, "What a beautiful woman! One would think it is the goddess Lakshmi herself walking into our city. We wonder if it is she and decide it is not, since she does not hold the red lotus in her hand." Shakuntala was talking softly to her son as they proceeded, and the people said, "Surely it must be someone from the other world. We have not seen the like of them before. Look at the young man. He looks noble like a lion and he walks like a lion. His neck and chest are as powerful as those of a lion. What a perfectly made figure he has. His feet are so beautiful and the soles are red, and they are planted so firmly on the ground with every step he takes. His walk is like that of a king." Another woman said, "When you say king, I am struck by something in his face and form. Why, he does look like our king Dushyanta. Whose son can he be? The lady with her gait like that of a swan talks like a nightingale. Her voice is so sweet. Her face is like the moon and she reminds one of a string of jasmine buds when she smiles. Her complexion is like a lotus petal. Her eyes are long and liquid, and again one thinks only of the lotus petal when we see her. Her skin is glowing like molten gold. She is surely someone from the heavens who has strayed into this world. She is not earthly." So spoke the people in the city, and unheeding their words and their curiosity, Shakuntala walked towards the palace of the king. Several of the citizens followed the two, and soon they reached the gates of the palace. Shakuntala was trembling in every limb, and she did not know what she should do now. She stood still for a while, and with her free hand she stilled the beating of her heart. She felt her son's hand in hers, and she made up her mind to be brave. Brave for the sake of this son of hers, who was to be the lord of the world. Her father had told her so, and it would be so. It was necessary that she should have the courage to accost the king. She began to walk towards the assembly hall where the king was set to spend his time granting audience to the people and listening to their grievances. Her mind was busy composing sentences with which she should address the king. Shyness overwhelmed her when she thought of Dushyanta, and she asked herself, "What shall I say when I stand before him? Shall I call him beloved or your majesty?" Even as she was thinking on these, she found that she had arrived in the council hall. Holding her son, who looked like the rising sun, Shakuntala entered the hall. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishnar Pranamast.